That's right. Okay. Okay, and I am recording now. This is session number 2 of biblical backgrounds. The last session, we did a quick introduction to some of the help that the backgrounds of archaeology and geography can give us. Today, I'm going to start off by introducing you all to an archaeological dig. Roughly, how long ago was that? Almost 40 years ago. I spent a summer on an archaeological dig in Israel. It's a place in the Judean Shephelah, the rolling hill country, called Latish, under a professor named David Usishkin from Tel Aviv University. And so I have a little bit of firsthand knowledge of how archaeology is actually done. And I wanted to walk you through that so you see that this is actually a scientific discipline. Archaeology is not just amateurs going out into the brush with shovels. There's quite a bit of science that goes into the selection of the site and the excavation of the site as it goes along. And I'm going to show you this so that you understand where some of the other things that I demonstrate here are authentic. This is not made up. This is the real thing. And what we're doing with archaeology is actually uncovering the layers of the past. I find it fascinating, and I hope that you will too. So let's go visit an archaeological dig. Let's see if I can find it. Yes, here we go. Oops. See what's coming up. Oh, wrong one. Sorry about that. Like I say, I'm really good at this when I'm really good at it. All right, and here's this. We'll move that over here. There we go. All right. This is the ancient city of Lachish. This photograph is taken from a moving van on the way to the dig one day. What you see in the foreground is a vineyard. They make this particular vineyard raises Thompson seedless grapes, those white grapes without seeds in them, and they're really, really good. Because they're so good, the vineyard keeps a high barbed wire fence all the way around. It's at least partially to keep people from the dig from coming over and stealing the grapes, I'm sure. But what makes it interesting is that Lachish in ancient times was known as a vineyard city. Why would anybody dig here? The first thing that you should notice is that, let me get you a wider view. They're from a little different angle. The first thing that you notice when you look at an ancient city site is that it has a flat top. Not totally flat, but flat. The sides come up at a steep angle, and then there's a large flat area on the top. That flat top is caused by successive layers of occupation, typically with walls. The walls around Lachish were built and rebuilt multiple times. When Joshua came through, the city had actually outgrown its walls and was into the surrounding countryside. So there was a series of temples outside of the walls that fell when Joshua took the place. At any rate, we know that that's an ancient city, and we know that it was destroyed a long time ago. So we look in our sources. The Bible is an important source. We know from the Bible that Lachish was one of the cities of Judea. It was given to the tribe of Judah by Joshua. We know that it was one of the cities in the boundary list of Judah, so it was on the western side of the Shephelah area. We know from the Egyptians that Lachish was very close to the international trade route. We know from other ancient sources that Lachish was a city about 40 kilometers southwest of Jerusalem, roughly a day's march. When the Assyrians conquered this area, we're told that Sennacherib took Lachish first and then marched up to Jerusalem, one day's march away. So there's a lot of literature out there, and nobody knew for sure until the 1930s, but it was always assumed that this particular mound, because it's big, because it's exactly where Lachish ought to be, we assumed that this was Lachish. The excavations of Lachish started in the early 20th century, about 100 years ago, and it has been excavated off and on ever since then. The excavation I was part of was under the auspices of the Tel Aviv University, David Usishkin, and it was the 10th year of excavation. So we call it Lachish Season 10. That'll be important later when I show you some buckets and how we get everything. So this is our spot, and it's an interesting place to dig. Digging starts off early in the morning. I call it dark early. It's our participants there in the Philippines get up at 3:30 in the morning. Dark early, really early in the morning. 3:30 is about when we got up. The roosters would begin to crow in our kibbutz. We were staying in a kibbutz, an agricultural village, not too far from Lachish, near Tel Gath, and the roosters would begin crowing. They'd turn the lights on about 3:30 in the morning, and the roosters would go nuts, all saying Boker Tov, which means good morning in Hebrew. So we'd get up, pull some clothes on, and stumble out into the courtyard area of the kibbutz there, where already the kibbutzniks would have black coffee ready for us, and maybe a little bit of pita bread. We didn't usually try to eat anything like breakfast at that time of the morning. Breakfast was about 8 o'clock after we'd been on the tel for a while. This is a photograph I took just at dawn as we're arriving at the site. And yeah, there it is. When I first got there, I didn't realize why this was happening. Why are we getting up in the middle of the night? And the answer came that first day. The work day starts on the tel at 4 in the morning. Breakfast is at 8, and then there's a juice break about 10. And we usually come down off the tel by 12:30 or 1 in the afternoon in order to come back to the kibbutz for the big meal of the day, which is, they call it dinner, but it would be lunchtime. Around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, we'd have our big meal, and then continue work under the shade in the kibbutz during the afternoon. So that's because of the heat of the day. It got terribly hot. This is the top of the tell, and you'll notice that it looks like it's been burned. The first thing that happens every year as the season gets started is that the first work crew will set fire to the top of the tell just to burn away all of the brush, grass and brush and whatever is up there. It just makes the rest of the working season easier. And it's usually no danger to anybody. So they burn it off. But you notice one tree, they're in a bit of a depression. They're on the top of the tell. That one tree is the indicator that there's water somewhere close by, because trees don't grow where there isn't water. Lachish probably had a carefully engineered water system. And I'll show you some other water systems at some of the other tells where we've actually excavated them. Lachish probably had this. This wasn't the summer that we would open that up. As far as I know, it hasn't been done yet. But we know the water system is there because it's got a tree as the only tree on top of the tell. Okay, while we're up here, we're looking off at some vineyards. Those are those same vineyards that I was shooting from down below. And you can see some of the trenches that are open. These are trenches from a previous season. When archaeologists leave a site for the season, they often just pull up their equipment and leave the pits and trenches open. That makes it easier the next time people need to go back. Sometimes we fill things in because of the danger. But that's rare because once we fill it in, it has to be dug up again by somebody else. So we try not to. Okay, as we were working every day, we had visitors from the Israeli Air Force fairly regularly. These are back in those days, Israel was still making their fighter plane called the Kafir. And these would go past. This might be a Phantom. I can't tell what this one is, but the fighter planes would come past nice and low over the tell because the base was quite nearby. We had a lot of fun on the 4th of July. There were 3 or 4 of us Americans, and we were feeling kind of sorry for ourselves being far away from home on the 4th of July when 2 of the fighter planes came by with doing a mock dogfight, and the one in the front let off a whole bunch of flares, the hot decoys to keep a missile from locking on. So we enjoyed our 4th of July watching the Israeli flares overhead. Just a few things as the dig is going on. It looks like a big mess. Honest to goodness, it just looks like it looks worse than a construction site. It looks more like a destruction site. This is actually part of the dig in the main gate entranceway to the city. You can see some trucks parked down at the road. We walked up this way. This was the actual road that led into the city of Lachish. I'll show you some other somewhat better views. But the point here is that there isn't very much left. One of the great principles of archaeology is that the vast majority of the ancient world is gone forever. It fell down, burned up, washed away, was carried off by looters. It's gone, and there's nothing to find. Probably 99% of the ancient world is just gone, so there's nothing to find. Of that which is left, 99% hasn't been dug up. So it's still buried out there someplace and we don't even know where. Or sometimes we do know where, but we can't afford to go dig. Digging, an actual excavation in an archaeological site, is a very expensive operation. Uh, Usually it's sponsored by a big university, and it has to have multiple donors. We're talking millions of dollars or euros or tens of millions of shekels, a lot of money to do a single season of excavation. And so a lot of it just hasn't been excavated. Of the 1% that is still surviving, less than 1% of that has been excavated. And yet we have a considerable amount of excavation. Of the 1% that's been excavated, less than 1% has been published. That means a book has been written with photographs of all of the finds and explanations of how the dig was done and all of the bits and pieces. So there's really very little. It seems like we've got an awful lot, but in reality, we have very little. We have to learn everything that we can from what's left. The ditch that you see in the center of this photograph is a drainage ditch, probably. The drainage canal used to pass under the main entrance gate. Today, all we have is this outline, stones in a line along the ground. Now, obviously, those stones were put there. It was deliberate. Some ancient engineer knew that the water that fell as rain on the top of the tell would have to drain somewhere. Here's a different view of that same drainage ditch. And here you can see it fits into the larger pattern much more completely. The big rock that goes all the way across the drainage ditch is a part of the main wall of the city. It's actually part of the footings of the wall. And the drainage was probably covered so that an enemy couldn't crawl in through the drainage ditch. All of this is bits and pieces of hints as to what the ancient city must have been like. You can see that they used very large stones. The people who originally built Lachish were Canaanite, and we have layers of the city that date to the Canaanite period. Here's the palace. This is the view of the palace of Lachish from the entrance gate. And this group of tourists is looking out toward that palace in the distance. It doesn't look like much, does it? Here are some details of that palace that we still have today. On the left is the threshold of the front entrance to the palace. It's mostly gone. Nasty, rotted pieces of limestone. On the right, you see the remains of a cobbled road leading up to the palace. And there's that gateway area that you see on the left with bits of the wall of the palace on either side. In biblical times, this was a magnificent place. It was used by the Canaanites and then was rebuilt, modified for use by the Israelites. This had, in its day, all of the luxuries that a monarch could desire. The king of Lachish lived here. Later on, the governor of this province of Israel would have lived in this palace. Today, it's just bleached rocks laying in the soil under an Israeli sun. At one time, this was whitewashed. It was all plastered and painted white and was visible from the Mediterranean Sea, which is about 10 kilometers away. People sometimes are amazed at how small Israel really is. It's a tiny little country with just barely room to turn around. Those fighter planes that we saw were often turning. If they went too far in one direction, they'd be over enemy territory within a minute or so. It's a very, very small country. Lachish is just barely on the Israel proper side of the green line. The green line marks the more or less the administrative boundary with the Palestinian territories. And there are people who believe that Israel should just allow a hostile state to be developed on the Palestinian territories. That would be a mistake because a completely independent Palestinian state would be a Muslim state. It would be an enemy, and weapons set up in a place like Lachish could dominate the entire coastal plain. It's a very, very small place. Even large caliber mortars could do that job. So anyway, here we are in the palace area. This is a view of what at one time, long time ago, was the siege ramp of the Assyrian king Sennacherib, 701 years before Christ. The Assyrian king Sennacherib, mentioned in First Kings and in Chronicles and in the book of Isaiah, came up to Lachish, laid siege to the place and destroyed it on his way to shut up Hezekiah in Jerusalem. So Isaiah and Hezekiah were actually in Jerusalem as witnesses to the fall of Lachish. Where is that siege ramp, you might ask me? The siege ramp is gone. It was taken away. Back in the 20s, there was an English archaeologist who came to Lachish with a great big crew. He had something like 2,000 Arab workmen who were paid very well for their work. They, to this day, the Arabs are very often the groundbreakers and the workmen on an archaeological site. They do a lot of important things. But back in those days, this Edward Starkey, or William Starkey was his name, Dr. Starkey found this huge pile of rocks up at one side of the tell, and he ordered his workmen to use their shovels and their wheelbarrows and just cart it all away. So that old Assyrian siege ramp, that close to 3,000-year-old siege ramp, was completely carried away. All of those stones, we don't have any idea what they looked like. He didn't keep very good records. He was looking for treasure, and his reports are not very helpful, to say the least. And so the siege ramp is gone, except way up at the top, and you see a couple of canopies near the top of that broken rock area. Those cover up squares. Let me show you inside a square. A square is called a square because that's what it is. It's 5 meters on a side with 1 meter of untouched territory in between any two squares. The square is actually works out to 4.5 meters on a side when you really, well, actually 4 meters on a side, which is big enough. We try to keep the sides of the square as close to vertical as possible. And we try to keep the bottom of the square moving down at a careful, slow rate. I call this Arrowhead Country. These two men were two of the other men who worked with me in this particular square. And they're digging in the area at the very base of the Israelite wall. You can see bits of white right in front of them. That's plaster from the original wall of the city, the wall that fell to Sennacherib. The brown stuff just behind the heading Arrowhead Country is mud bricks. So that is the original surface of the mud brick wall of Lachish from the year 701 BC. The soil that they're digging in is composed almost entirely of debris that fell down from the wall, from the top of the wall. So in this area, we were finding broken pottery, lots of that. We were finding arrowheads, not a huge number, but significant number of iron arrowheads, because they would be shot one way or the other, either hit something or miss and fall down. And the arrow itself, made of wood, is all disappeared, but we still find the rusted out hunk of iron that was the arrowhead from the period. So here we are working in a square. The canopies define the location of the squares. David Osishkin is a very good dig director. He tries to treat his diggers very courteously. He tries to make sure that we're comfortable. And so during the heat of the day, the canopies are always up. And we only move a canopy when the diggers are moving from one square to another. You can see that several squares are open at the same time. Usually a single crew will stay with one square for an entire season. So I spent my whole summer in this same square of the Assyrian siege ramp. Some of the others were in parts of the Canaanite city. Then there was another square, this one, that was inside the Israelite wall. We call this this particular hole, we called Kimberley. It was named Kimberley after the South African diamond mine. There were 3 South Africans who were with us that summer, and they got their own square to work in. And it's a fascinating square. It's inside the inner wall of the city of Lachish. The people of Lachish, as they realized that the Assyrians were going to build a ramp on the outside of the city, built a counter ramp just opposite on the inside. And in that hole, we find all of the desperate measures that the people of Lachish were taking as they knew that the destruction was coming. So household furnishings, cobblestones, pottery of every sort, even the bones of children are found in this hole. It was 15 meters deep, just one square, and they took it all the way down to the cobblestone street at the base of the wall. When they got all the way down there, they realized that this is much too deep, and so in the wisdom of the director, when the season was over, workmen came back with wheelbarrows and dumped dirt and debris from the pile back into the hole, filled it up. But before they did that, the archaeologists who had worked in that hole took an old Coke bottle, and in the Coke bottle they left a note in Hebrew and English saying, This was Lachish season 10. We opened up this hole in order to find the street level. The publication is in such and such a place. Look in the Tel Aviv University. And then they plugged the Coke bottle and left it at the very bottom. Anybody who reads the report of Lachish would not dig there again because it's well documented what we found there. But if anybody ever does dig there, they will have gone through several seasons of wasted time only to find a Coke bottle at the bottom. I'll never forget that. So the inhabitants of Lachish must have been absolutely terrified. The city was doomed. Everything they could do was not enough, and the city was finally burned. All right, let's see if I can get another slide. Here's some illustrations of digging. Like I say, archaeology is the art and science of digging a hole and telling a story about it afterwards. But you'll notice that these two ladies are not using great big shovels and pickaxes and wheelbarrows, let alone heavy equipment. We would no more allow a backhoe or a bulldozer onto an archaeological site than fly. That would be a terrible thing to do. Digging is a very slow, careful project. Here's a couple more shots of digging in another square. This is an area called the glacis. The glacis is the sloped outer surface of the wall of the city. It's actually in between the inner and the outer wall in this part of the tell. And we can tell that it was built because there appears to be a surface. And the excavators are working very carefully. Every day in every square, the photographer would come by. So we would have to take down our canopy and clean up the square to the best of our ability. And one of the volunteers would go stand in a corner of the square to give some scale. That's what's going on here. This isn't my square. This is somebody else's square. But there they are. The typical square looks very much like this. The sandbags that you see on the right. Here, let me show you some more sandbags. The sandbags you see off in the distance define the bulk. The side of the square is called a bulk, B-A-U-L-K. And those sandbags keep things from caving in. They mark out the location of the edge of the square, and they also give a walkway for workers getting from one square to another. What you see in the side of the square, the vertical bulk, is called the section. So here we're looking at a section of the ramp. And that tells a story, that tells the history of what has fallen into that area. Here's a volunteer in the ramp, and it happens to be me 40 years ago. I wore that yellow and blue shirt for that summer. Yeah, I think I had two shirts with me. What's funny is that the yellow has a tendency to reflect the sunlight, and the blue would absorb the sunlight, and so I ended up with a striped burn on my back, a sunburn. My job on this particular day was to remove fallen rocks from the top of the siege ramp itself. And frankly, that's what threw my back out originally. I went through physical therapy for about 2 years because of a blown disc in my back. That happened while I was doing this. That flag up on the top of the tell is an Ulster flag. Ulster is North Ireland. We had one young man, rather flamboyant character. I think I've got a picture of him later on, who was from North Ireland, and he insisted on flying his Ulster flag on the top of the tell. Once in a while, our Israeli Air Force fighter planes would come down close just to have a look at that flag. This is the 10 a.m. juice break. They tried to keep us hydrated. It was actually quite hot on top of the tell. And so the volunteers in each part of the tell would gather for a brief time just to drink something, get the cold juice. Usually it was a kind of a lemonade stuff. It wasn't very good, but it's what we had, and we were thankful for it. This is the tools of the archaeological trade. It's the old story. First you get a bucket, then you get a shovel, about the worms. The buckets come in two colors, at least on our dig. The buckets come in black for dirt and stuff that we're going to throw away. Yellow for pottery and other artifacts that we want to preserve. The next tool over looks like a concrete trowel. And it is, in fact, a concrete trowel bought at the local Home Depot. The next tool over looks like a little pickaxe. And that's made by hand in a shop at Tel Aviv University. We call it a latish. It's a French word that probably just means a little pickaxe. And I'm not sure why we use French for the little pickaxe, but that's our digging tool. Our major digging tool is designed to loosen the soil a little bit. We'll drag the sharp end through the soil to loosen it. Sometimes we'll use one of the straight edges to pull soil onto the trowel. The trowel is used to move a small amount of dirt at a time. The whisk broom is also made in the shop in Tel Aviv, and it's designed for clearing loose soil. As you can tell, this isn't designed to dig quickly. If we go down in a square, if a crew can manage to go down 1 centimeter in a day, we've done an excellent day's work. And maybe we'll find nothing. But we will have found nothing very, very carefully. So that's the point of doing that. When the black buckets come out of the tell, they go here. Before they go over the edge, before all that soil is dumped over the edge, two volunteers, this actually is one of the area supervisors and another very experienced volunteer, put all of the soil through a sieve so that if anything small, a piece of jewelry, a piece of pottery, anything small happens to be there, just by mistake got into the wrong bucket, they'll find it. One of the things that they found was this little arrowhead. Now, I remember this one because it just happened to come out of the square where one of my friends was digging, who I'd gone to Israel with that summer. And he had been digging, and he inadvertently, he or one of the others in that square had sent a bucket to the sieve that included this tiny little arrowhead. You can see that's 8 centimeters long. It's not a very big thing. It's made of bronze. It's not made of iron. So this isn't an arrowhead that was shot by Sennacherib. This dates back to the time of Joshua, approximately. You can never know for sure. Interestingly enough, the arrowhead was probably found mixed in with the bones of a goat. And we don't know if they're associated. It would have helped if the digger had actually found it where it was lying. Instead, it went out with bones and everything else, the way it went. But this arrowhead probably dates back to the time of Joshua's attack on Lachish. And this gives us a little idea of the kinds of weapons that Joshua would have used, that the Canaanites would have had at that time. Okay, along the way, every square, every day, everything that's found has to be recorded. The supervisor is on the right. The lady on the left is one of the volunteers, and they're going over the records of exactly what has been found and exactly what layers have been dug. Here's a supervisor come to visit a square to do his inspection, to see if all of the layers of soil are named correctly. Here's another supervisor working with a volunteer, drawing pictures, recording exactly what was found where. And all along the way, we keep track of the layers. This is something that has been there in the tell for, that I know of, 30 years now. Every layer is distinguished from the layer above and below by the things that are found. At one time, we had a level 7, and then they discovered that there's a burn layer in between 7A and 7B. And you can see the burn layer in the actual soil. Level 8, Roman numeral 8, way at the bottom, is a Canaanite level. 7B, the lower level, is also Canaanite. 7A, the upper 7 level, is the first Israelite level. And then level 6 is clearly from the Israelite kingdom era. We don't see a destruction of the city until level 5, which is where Sennacherib's time is. So there, in just a few layers, we see close to 800 years of the history of this site. A lot of stuff going on there. Okay, here's my Ulsterman, my Irishman. He always managed to find jobs that didn't involve moving big rocks, but he was very, very good at surveying. He could use that transit like nobody I've ever watched. He was very good at it. Everything has to be recorded in 3 dimensions, exactly where it was found. Along the way, every day, there would be a blackboard diagram. Sometimes this was kept at the dig site, and usually it was in one of the classrooms back at the kibbutz. And we'd say, here's what we think we've got. It looks like this wall here, and this is there, and here's where we've dug, and this is what's on the other side. The diagram on the right is the kind of publication that comes out later to show what has actually been found in the strata of the tell. The term tell simply means an inhabited mound of an old city. It's an Arabic word, and it's also a Hebrew word. And it just means a flat top mound that was a city. The layers in the mound define the different civilizations laid one upon another. When we look at the section, we're looking at the layers of the city. The other kind of diagram that is dug or produced regularly is the plan. The plan shows us on the ground everything that's found in a particular layer. And so here's a plan view of the gateway. And you can see the curved path of the drainage ditch that I showed you earlier. I mentioned every day the photographer came through. His is a very important job. His records show what the site looked like as it was being uncovered. So it's very important. A year later, everything will have dried out and the colors will have changed. It'll be difficult to see the layers. The photographer records the details that are in fact being destroyed as they are dug. So a very important job. He carried two cameras, a big 5x7 Pentax, 5x7 centimeter Pentax, and a Hasselblad 2¼ inch square Hasselblad camera. And they were shooting film, of course. And his kit of cameras and lenses was pretty expensive, but his collection, literally thousands of rolls of film, by the end of a season, would end up in the final publication of the dig. Not all of his pictures, but the vast majority of them would end up in the final publication. So his is a very important job. Here we're looking down into an empty square. Here's another empty square. You can see the burn layer in the back, just a layer of ash right about where the ladder's rungs go into the wall. There's a rectangular pile of rocks in the middle of this square. We're not sure what that is. Nobody was ever sure. When an archaeologist isn't sure, he will almost always say it was some kind of a cultic installation. But the fact is, we don't know. Maybe somebody wanted a coffee table, and so there it is. As we dig, if an artifact is found in the wall of the square, and most of it is in the wall, we try to leave it there. So there's a pot, and we call it in situ. The next year I was back at Latish bringing a group of tourists, and went back to the same site and found that the pot had disappeared. The grave robbers had been there. That's a constant. At archaeological sites, we can't keep guards. And so when the archaeologists are gone, the grave robbers come and take whatever they can find. They just dig holes and run off with things. Okay, this is a pottery bucket. Pottery buckets are always yellow, and the pottery bucket always has a tag on it. So this particular bucket says the pottery in this bucket is from Lachish season 10. R stands for the siege ramp, which is the collection of sections. 6123 is the locus number. When the soil changes from one color or texture to another, the supervisors will assign a new locus number. The actual bucket number is 61,151. 61,151 buckets of pottery by this time had been processed. And this was August 7th of 1985. So all of that data is going to end up on each bit of pottery as it comes out of the hole. When we're done for the day, we carry our pottery back to the kibbutz. And after lunch, every day was pot washing. There's a yellow bucket. When we brought that in, we filled the bucket with water. After lunch, the water will have soaked into each piece of pottery, and we very gently dip that pottery and look at both sides to see if there wasn't some writing. If we ever find writing on a piece of pottery, we know that that's ancient, and it's very, very important. It's worth wasting a whole day letting the pottery soak in order to find a little bit of writing. The summer that I was there, we never found any writing on any of the pottery. But in another site just a year before, people found a collection of a dozen or so with writing on all of them. They had used these pot sherds for sending letters from one site to another. So it can be really important. Pot washing would happen every day. Then the pottery was allowed to dry, and the following day, baskets of these broken sherds were gone through by the professional staff. This lady is actually the wife of one of the supervisors, and her job was to go through the pottery one bucketful at a time and decide what pieces should be collected. Sometimes she would find a dozen pieces that all belonged to the same ancient pot, and she would put that collection together into a plastic bag like you see on the left. And those will be taken to Tel Aviv University, where they would be reconstructed into the original shape of the pot. Every piece that is kept is inscribed with the date, the locus number, the bucket number, the date. All of that information in India ink on each piece. The pieces that are not kept are put back in buckets and we dump them back at the Tel. The next day, back at the Tel, there's our square. That's where we're going to work. The pottery is dumped, and the day is done, or the new day begins. Dumping out the old pottery, beginning the new. That's a little bit of a introduction to season 10 of Lachish. I enjoyed that summer. It's something that I'll never do again. It's too expensive and the work is too hard. You're moving a lot of dirt, and for an old guy like me, that's getting to be a bit much. But to recognize just how careful we have to be in order to get all of that stuff. And again, most of what we took out of the Tel in terms of pottery went back in a big discard pile next to the Tel. I've been back to that discard pile several times since then. It's still there, and tourists who know where to look can find that and pick up old pieces of pottery that were discarded by the archaeologists. All of this would go together into a publication, which is in, I believe, 12 volumes, just on this one Tel. That's the technical publication that's found in a few big libraries around the world. And then popular articles and popular books are published that are available to the rest of us. We read those things. A whole book on Lachish, frankly, would be somewhat boring. There's a few exciting bits, some things that are really pretty exciting, pretty important. But most of it is just the day-to-day background, trivial stuff of the life of ancient people. I can say personally that standing there in my square at the top of the siege ramp in Arrowhead Country and digging each day, realizing that as I was digging, I was uncovering bits of soil and perhaps some bits of pottery and arrowheads and some other things, an iron chain we found that summer, that had not been uncovered, that had not seen the light of day for almost 3,000 years. It's exciting because sometimes you find things that you weren't looking for. You find things that answer questions that you didn't even know you had. The process of archaeology is a great thing to be involved in for the few who can ever do that. For the rest of us, it's something to check up on. We can look online as we're studying a passage of scripture. It doesn't hurt to do a quick Google search on place names or events or people names in the Bible. It's surprising how often the archaeologists have found something. And these days, those things are often published in a way that is very accessible to us on the internet. So it's just a part of it. Archaeology is just a part of the whole process. And as we move along, we're going to see more of this. When we get together on next Monday, we're going to start looking at where we're going to get into the Old Testament section of backgrounds. We'll be starting off with some maps of great big areas, and we're going to see how the Holy Land, Israel, and the surrounding territory fits into the much broader biblical landscape. And I'll show you how the whole world seems to focus on the land of Israel. Fascinating stuff I enjoy. Let's unmute. It's time to give it up for the day. This has been fun.